Section G54. The Bloodline Program begins. To follow Section G54, you start where bureaucracies hide their intentions, in the margins. Mid-1960s into the 1980s, procurement lines begin to sprout a new vocabulary under harmless banners. Population genomics, health systems modernization, environmental exposure studies. None of it sits in defense ledgers at first glance. It lives inside blended budgets, HEW-era pilots, later HHS and DoD partnerships, where epidemiology can piggyback on infrastructure without ringing alarms. It's tidy, clinical, and if you're not looking for it, invisible. The paper doesn't say Greada. It doesn't need to. A whistle memo from the late 1970s, sanitized beyond names, threads the needle. G54 phenotype variant surveillance. There's a contractor field blacked out, a site code you can match to a separate redacted task order, and a phrase that repeats like a nervous tick: lineage monitoring. That's not ordinary public health language. It sounds like a census, but sharper. It treats families as vectors, not patients. Meanwhile, early epidemiology blips appear where you'd expect drama, not disease. Counties shadowing test ranges, energy corridors, and aerospace zones register anomalies in hospital logs. A cluster of radiation-like symptoms with no radiation event on the books. Nausea that looks like microwaves. Fatigue without exposure history. 30 years later, when 2025 datasets finally layer decades cleanly, those blips don't scatter. They settle into bands. Inside pilot programs, lineage monitoring shows up as a coded term for tracking heritable markers in anonymized cohorts. On paper, it's innovative surveillance, catch inherited disorders, improve outcomes. But the sampling frames don't follow standard demographic spread. They weight toward counties with persistent aerospace activity, nuclear stewardship footprints, and grid nodes that hum day and night. Someone is fishing in charged waters. Hospitals near hotspot counties keep logging parallel clusters. Staff remember the intake scripts: rule out industrial spill, rule out rad clinic exposure, mark idiopathic, when the answers won't line up. A nurse in her 80s recalls the word pilot, whispered at staff meetings. Not trial. Pilot. As if the hospital was a runway. Here's the soft cliffhanger the files never explain. 3 ancestral haplogroups recur across the surveillance snapshots. Not a perfect match, but enough to raise eyebrows. They're tied to lineages that predate zip codes and base perimeters. Tied to migration paths that map, inconveniently, onto the same corridors where the anomalies keep returning. It's not proof of design. It's a handprint in wet cement. G54 doesn't announce itself as a program with a logo. It behaves like an instruction that travels, embedded in forms, echoed in procurement checkboxes, reinforced in quiet needs memos passed between health and defense desks. A rubric. A way to decide whose samples get deeper panels, whose family trees are annotated, whose charts get a colored tab you can't decode later without the legend. Meanwhile, the infrastructure expands upward and downward. You can see the architecture if you tilt your head. Satellite-linked health data systems normalize nationwide reporting. Regional labs upgrade to handle high-throughput genotyping. A handful of contractors specialize in secure cohort management. Above that, a space-facing posture grows teeth. Orbital domain awareness moves from debris to anomalies. It all looks like modernization until you overlay it. What nobody says out loud becomes the working reality. If contact isn't theatrical, it's administrative. You don't announce visits. You track inheritance. You catalog variants. You learn which bodies tolerate proximity and which get sick. You build a feedback loop between where the sky behaves strangely and which genomes light up under stress. The whistle memo's most revealing line lands like an apology. G54 variance cohorts require longitudinal retention. That means you don't let families fall out of the frame. You follow them when they move. You resample when a child turns 12, 18, 25. Tags trail people across state lines. New clinics pick up where old ones left off, as if the chart itself carries a magnet. In practice, lineage monitoring becomes a shadow health passport. School screenings fold in new panels no parent remembers consenting to. Workplace wellness programs offer free genetic risk checks. Consent lives in paragraph 5 of a form written by a contractor, stored on a server nobody outside a clearance can audit. It's voluntary until your insurer begins to nudge. Conservative reviewers will say, this is just the arc of medicine. They're half right. Precision health was always coming. But precision is a scalpel. In the G54 files, it cuts to selection. Which lines get flagged? Which get exempt status? Which are classified as baseline controls and never told they were part of a baseline. The 3 recurring haplogroups are the unquiet part. Their recurrence isn't an accusation. It's a question. Were these lines chosen, or did they survive something the rest of us couldn't? In hotspot counties, grandmothers remember lights that made cattle unwell. They remember sons with perfect teeth who woke with metal tastes in their mouths. The charts never mention lights. They mention idiopathic malaise. To see section G54 clearly, stop searching for a treaty. Follow the sampling frames. Follow the labs that expanded quietly. Follow the families who kept getting calls long after the study ended. The beginning of the Bloodline Program isn't a ribbon cutting. It's a shift in who medicine watches and why. And once you accept that, the 2026 leak stops looking sensational. It looks like the first time the rubric slipped its mask. The sphere network angle, sky grid meets ground nodes. While G54 embeds in paperwork, something else is writing across the sky. In 2025, the Space Force shifts its AI posture from cataloging debris to tracking orbital anomalies in real time. The language is careful, but the behavior isn't subtle. Live domain awareness, layered feeds, decision support built for patterns that don't fit satellites. Meanwhile, civilian trackers and pilots keep describing luminous points that hold geometry like they're following math, not wind. Patrick Jackson gives the chaos a framework. He calls it a layered sphere network, types 3, 2, and 1 behaving like stacked infrastructure, a hypothesis echoed by independent trackers, though not officially endorsed. Type 3 sits near ground, skimming lakes, hovering over tree leans, weaving through neighborhoods without rotor noise. People feel nauseous when they're too close, or they lose 30 seconds they can't explain. Type 2 spans the air above, pacing aircraft and marking corridors like relay nodes. Type 1 is the distant scaffold, triangles and V-shapes that hold formation in orbital space, expanding and contracting like measuring rigs. Cautious agencies won't sign off on that taxonomy, but their planning echoes its outline. The Space Force AI plan doesn't say spheres. It says anomaly detection at scale, ingestion from multiple sensors, and machine learning to find structure in noise. Meanwhile, verified patterns refuse to go away. Equidistant spacing, synchronized pulsing, and formations that recur over nuclear facilities, grid substations, and aerospace tests. When human systems surge, war games, satellite deployments, missile trials, the lights appear in geometric arrays, then drift back to quiet. Underground claims complicate it. Teams exploring strange passages in Utah and Argentina report scorched bands and metallic flecks fused into stone. Contested, yes, but consistent. Videos circulate of elongated figures and time flex artifacts. Skeptics call them artifacts, believers call them technicians. The conservative position stays the only defensible one. Unresolved anomalies, not proven bases. Still, the ground stories keep arriving in places where the sky keeps drawing triangles. Here's where G54 threads into the grid. Take the 2026 leaks, exposure signatures, panels flagging non-Mendelian clusters and rare copy number shifts, and overlay the geofences used in historical hotspot mapping. The matches aren't perfect, but the overlap exceeds noise. Counties with lineage monitoring pilots sit under arcs of repeated sphere activity. Health events spike inside windows when aerial formations concentrate over energy corridors. Add the 2025 datasets, and the bands sharpen. Jackson's model reads like infrastructure logic, not apparitions. Type 3 acts like sensors at the surface. Type 2 stitches coverage across regions. Type 1 anchors the lattice above, trilaterating position as if everything below is a target or a client. Sensor teams in hotspot valleys log microwave bursts concurrent with sightings. Environmental monitors pick short gamma spikes that don't fit cosmic background profiles, brief, local, and gone. You can argue instrumentation. You can't argue that instruments keep noticing at the same times and places. An internal brief, one we can't show but can summarize, labels these overlaps as proximity effects on human physiology. Not harm as a goal, harm as a byproduct of process. That reads cold until you map it to lived stories. Household poltergeists that time with microwave spikes, headaches and vertigo that follow a grid of visits, cattle unwell under a ceiling of points holding still. The brief hedges, but the implication is ugly. If the network is an active system, living near its nodes is like standing inside a machine's maintenance cycle. Conservative voices remind us, correlation isn't causation. That's the right instinct. But the network behaves like a program that adapts. When human launch cadence accelerates, Type 1 arcs appear above crowded bands. When infrastructure fails, Type 2 clusters align with transmission corridors as if rebalancing. When ground-level anomalies are reported, Type 3 activity rises, then recedes after a window that reads like a sweep. For our story, the pivot is simple. If the sky lattice has logic, it's interacting with ground biology whether we consent or not. And if Section G54 built a ledger of bodies that tolerate proximity, that ledger becomes an index the lattice can use. Exempt stops reading like privilege and starts reading like compatibility. Entire families tagged not because they're protected, but because they're useful, immune enough to stand inside the field. One detail that will matter later: triangles. Thermal drones and pilot-grade reports keep resolving three-point geometries at fixed scales, from treetop height to orbital edges. AI pattern matching frames them as trilateration tools, the same math that underpins GPS. 3 nodes, 1 locked surface. You can survey, you can target, or you can stabilize an interaction zone where the ground meets whatever the system is doing above. Unknown to many of the people living under those triangles, a second map exists: health registry cohorts, school screening expansions, wellness program genotyping, that keep the lineage monitoring cohorts current. When the sky sweeps, the ground is pre-sorted. The feedback loop hums: observe, flag, resample, adjust. A network doesn't need a treaty. It needs coverage, compatibility, and updates. Which brings us to the files stamped with a term nobody wanted public: exposure signatures tagged to locations where the geometry repeats. The 2026 panels name their windows. The orbits answer with patterns. The bodies answer with markers. And under it all, the rubric rides along, a quiet instruction that started the night a president went missing and matured into a system that treats bloodlines as settings. The 2026 DNA leak. What's actually in the files? Open the archive and the first thing that hits you isn't drama, it's logistics. Rows of sample IDs, 12-character strings pointing to people reduced to tubes. Each line carries panel names, CNV arrays, long-read WGS, targeted structural variant assays, followed by instrument codes, batch numbers, and chain of custody stamps that trace from clinic to courier to a lab you can map against procurement memos from 15 years earlier. There's nothing paranormal about it. It reads like any modern genomics program until you look at the flags. The flags don't behave. A column labeled inheritance pattern should be boring. Autosomal dominant, recessive, mitochondrial, de novo. Instead, clusters stack under non-Mendelian, with subcodes that shouldn't exist outside a method's paper. Segmental duplications with variable penetrance, mosaic structural variants, complex de novo rearrangements that repeat across unrelated families. Alongside that column sits another, CNV notes. It lists rare copy number shifts that recur in geographic bands, not pedigrees. Every flagged record carries a metadata bundle that shouldn't accompany a medical panel. There's a time window. It's labeled event proximity. Microwave and gamma window markers sit as timestamps, 24-hour, 72-hour, 10-day, mapped to regional incident logs that have nothing to do with ambulances and everything to do with airspace activity. The anonymization is tight, but the geofences match the corridors we've already seen: nuclear stewardship counties, grid nodes, aerospace zones. The crosswalk is anonymized, yes, but the shape is unmistakable. You can't ignore the lab nomenclature because it keeps you honest. SV cluster underscore complex, CNV rare underscore large, DSV underscore multi breakpoint, UPD underscore partial. These are terms that show up in Cell and Nature, not cable documentaries. The files don't claim extraterrestrial anything. They claim complexity. They claim inheritance patterns that refuse to obey classroom rules and copy number landscapes that spike after specific. Windowed exposures. When you overlay, the math tightens. These markers recur more in places with repeated sphere formations than in control counties. Then comes the column that shouldn't exist at all: G54 status. Most entries are blank. A subset reads monitor. A smaller subset reads exempt. The tag sits at the family level, not the individual. One line of grandparents, parents, children, stamped as a group. The audit log shows resampling schedules for monitor: 12, 18, 25. Exempt shows deferred. It's not protection. It's exclusion from what the files never say. Chain of custody tags are the anchor. They record who touched what, when. Courier IDs correspond to vendors in FOIA procurement schedules that, on paper, bought cold chain capacity for population health pilots. The dates line up. The same vendors appear in defense-adjacent contracts for secure cohort management. It's not proof of intent, but it's provenance. The leak's precision lives in the boring parts. The anomalies aren't all genetic. There's a symptom codex that rides in a sidecar. HBO terms for nausea, vertigo, dysautonomia, paresthesia. They spike inside those exposure windows and taper in patterns that fit pulses, not chronic exposures. Hospitals log them as idiopathic. The panels reframe them as acute event-associated. The phrasing is gentle. The graph isn't. To keep this grounded, here's what the files don't do. They don't identify aliens. They don't claim abductions. They don't speculate. Every assertion that matters sits on lab codes you can cross-check against published assay types. Where the files step beyond data, they mark it as inference. Event proximity is an association, not causation. Non-Mendelian clusters is a label, not a theory. Our job is to respect those boundaries while asking why a CIA genomics unit was auditing any of this. A separate sheet, titled Crosswalk, links flagged individuals to anonymized geofences. It doesn't name towns. It draws squares. Inside the squares, the event proximity windows populate like calendar heat maps. You can layer years, watch streaks form, watch them cool. When you sync that playback with publicly logged sphere formations, the correlations keep punching above chance. Conservative reviewers will say sampling bias. Fine. Then explain why exempt families consistently live in squares that burn hottest. Exempt begs the only question that matters. Who gets that label and why? The files offer 3 hints. One is a phenotype note, asymptomatic under repeated exposure windows. 2 is a process descriptor, deprioritized for resampling per G54 rubric. 3 is a footnote that landed like a confession. Exempt status indicates compatibility. Compatibility with what is the part the leak never says, but the rest of the archive won't stop telling you. A caution lives at the center of the folder. A header reads, Inference Boundaries. It reminds auditors that structural variants can mimic inheritance anomalies, that mosaicism can look like de novo noise, that rare CNVs are rare until you sample millions. It warns against attributing clustered complexity to a singular cause. It's the kind of note that keeps scientists employed and conspiracies at arm's length. It's also followed by the line that poisons sleep. G54 status assignments reflect operational considerations beyond lab scope. Operational considerations. That phrase belongs to logistics, not medicine. It glues the genetics to something else, flight windows, tasking calendars, deployments. Which is why the final sheet reads less like a lab report and more like a manifest. It lists families by code, grid squares by hash, and a schedule by quarter. Monitor lines show resample dates. Exempt lines show nothing. At the bottom, stamped in a confidence ink watermark you only see at an angle, is the same rubric title from the Whistle memo. G54, Lineage Monitoring. Taken alone, the 2026 files are clinical. Placed on the map we've been building, they become administrative truth. They show what's counted, who's chased, and who's waved through. They ground the noise in procedure. And standing over them, you can feel how a system would use this. How a lattice in the sky would need lists like these on the ground. How a program would separate those who react from those who don't. And how a single red tag, exempt, could define a family's fate for generations.